Well, g'day everybody. Steve here from Undux Touring Australia. Hope everybody's well. If you're new here and you've just found the channel, welcome. If you're an old hand, thanks as always for taking time to watch one of my clips. Today I want to talk about camping equipment. In particular, a question I was asked quite a while ago by a friend of mine. And the question was, what camping gear should I take on a longer trip as opposed to on a shorter trip? Now, I've thought about this for a while, and it's taken me a long time to get back to answering this question, so I'm sorry about that. But the answer is there's not a lot of difference in what you should take for a short trip and a long trip. I'll cover all these topics as we go, but I think we have to start with the preparation and the idea of where you're planning to go on your trip in the first place, because that's going to make a difference. Is it a weekend trip? Is it a week-long trip? Is it a month-long or longer epic excursion? Because that's certainly going to make a difference to what you take. And also, where are you going? You're just going for a run to the beach? Are you touring the highways and motorways and just going to towns? Are you going through the outback? Are you going very remote? All of that stuff makes a difference. And the equipment you'll want to take and what you need for those is slightly different from one trip to another. So we'll start out fairly easily. We're going away for a weekend camping trip, and we're not going anywhere too hard. So I'll use the Wadigan Mountains. Now, the Wadigan Mountains has got everything from very difficult, hardcore four-wheel drive tracks to just touring around, having a look at the place. So it gives you everything you sort of need to know for a short trip. There's some beautiful campsites. There's campsites with facilities. There's campsites with no facilities. So just depending what you're doing. But let's say you're starting out, you just want to go camping and you're not looking to do some hard tracks. So you go out to the Wadigans and you can go and find some good camping spots without driving anything hard. So I'd suggest on every trip you do, no matter what, you need some basic stuff. You need the ability to deflate your tyres. That might be something as simple as a stick, but if you've got a stick, you need a tyre gauge. You can go up to other style tyre inflators. There's the ones that remove the valve and you do a tyre at a time, much like the ARB deflators. There's a few brands that do them. Then there's the ones like I like to use now. I personally use a Maxtrax Indeflate, but there is other types that do the same thing. And you can do 2 tyres, or depending on the variant, 4 tyres at the same time. So it really depends on what you need and what you can afford. Now, any of these methods are great for letting your tyres down. They do the job. And there you go. You want your softer tyres, of course, for terrain, like even normal dirt, like in the Wadigans on the graded roads. For example, this Land Cruiser behind me, it's better to use tyre pressures of somewhere between 25 and 30 pound rather than the 40 or 40 plus you use on the highway. Just softens everything, makes the ride a bit better, and you will encounter some corrugations and potholes. So you deflate your tyres, it's nice, you're driving on gravel roads, you've done your camping trip, you want to pump them back up. So you need a compressor and some form of tyre gauge anyway, which you've already got to lower your tyres so you know what your pressure is, but you need it when you pump them back up when you go back to the bitumen. So every trip, long trip, short trip, tyre inflation and deflation is essential. You need those things. So that pretty well covers that. Now, if you're solo, there's only minor differences to if you've got the partner or the family with you. So we'll just assume that this is per person anyway. So it depends. You need Seating. So it's usually myself and Karen, so we take 2 seats, obviously. But if you've got the family and the kids, you need as many seats as you need for that, for just sitting around camp, all that stuff. So you need that on a long trip or a short trip, whether you're making lunch or camping overnight. So that doesn't change long trip or short trip. So far, we've still got everything we take on a short trip on a long trip. Now you need your cooking equipment. Now we all know what our cooking equipment is, whether it's a gas fire, whether you light a fire and cook over the flames, whether it's induction these days. Whatever cooking equipment you want, you take. Now, for a shorter trip, I would just pick 1 or 2 at most. If you're planning to have a campfire and cook on the campfire, you take that gear. If you're going to use gas or another form, you take the gear to go with that on a shorter trip. On a longer trip, you may wish to take some more bits and pieces like camp ovens and so on if you want to do roasts or dampers or that kind of thing. So you just add a bit of gear in. I would suggest that's a longer trip thing. Probably if I'm over going away for an overnighter, I don't need a camp oven. I'm not going to do a roast for a single nighter or something like that. But if I'm a week long into a trip, I might want to do a roast. So think about that. There's weight involved in this stuff too. So your cookware is not going to change vastly. You may just add to it slightly on a longer trip. Don't fall into the trap of having 5,000 ways to cook unless you've got a camper trailer, caravan or plenty of space in your ute to carry all the gear, because it all adds weight. And how much do you use it? If you're going on an overnighter and you're not using the camp oven, why take the camp oven? So that to me is pretty well covers the cooking side of it. Now your utensils, your dishes and stuff, you need them. So that doesn't change. That's the same on a short trip or a long trip. So yeah, that's not going to be any different. So we'll get into recovery equipment. Recovery equipment is also a bit dependent on what you're doing. If you're doing a short trip on mostly gravel roads, you don't need much. I would take a snatch strap and the basic stuff with you in case you get stuck. Some max tracks if you have those kind of things. If you've got a winch, well, it's on the car anyway, so the bits to need that. But base that on what you're doing. Like if you're going on a overnighter, but it's going to be wheeling the tough tracks, take your recovery gear. Take as much of it as you think's necessary with your winch, your snatch strap, your soft shackles, your main shackles, all that gear. Take all of it. Apologies, somebody's just started mowing their lawn. I hope it's not coming through too loudly. I'm at home today, just the way it works out. So, what's next? So your recovery gear, if you're doing a longer trip, well, you're probably going to take more of it with you because you're not sure what you're going to encounter. So a lot of my tricks are remote travel in remote areas, so I need some gear to be able to get myself out of trouble. So that's going to mean tree trunk protectors, maybe ground anchors or some way of attaching your winch cable to something if there's not many trees around. You can always bury a spare if you have to, but have all that gear because you're going to need it. On a shorter trip, probably less gear, but also it's dependent on whether you've got mates going with you as well. Mates on a longer trip or a shorter trip is a different thing too. If you're all doing a short trip, you're probably all carrying your own gear. It doesn't matter, and not many spares because you're not too far from home. If you're on a longer trip, recovery gear, particularly like say you're going a month or longer, recovery gear on a longer trip with friends, you can share the gear around. You know, we don't need 5 snatch straps, but we might need a few. So a couple of people take snatch straps, a couple of people take winch extensions, cables. Yeah, you get the idea. Share your gear around so you're not doubling, tripling up on things that you don't need too many of. So on a longer trip, more recovery gear. So that's that. Now onto extended gear like that. On a shorter trip on tracks you probably know, There's a plane, guys. I live near an airfield. All right, it's a bit quieter now. Anyway, like I was saying, on a longer trip, you can share that gear around and makes it easier. Now, also, you could go to more advanced equipment. Like if you're running around in the Victorian high country, for example, I'd make sure you got a chainsaw, especially if you're alone, because some of those tracks, you don't know when there's a tree going to fall. There's going to be times where if a tree has gone over, your chainsaw's not big enough, or sadly, that's a turnaround situation, but you know, that's not that common. So take a chainsaw, clear your track up. Better to clear a track with a chainsaw than make a new track around the obstacle, unless there's no other option. You assess those situations when you get there, guys. So for a longer trip, you add in things like chainsaws. You put in make sure you've got your snatch recovery block for double line pull, your drag chains to pull trees and things out of the way. That kind of stuff, so you can clear tracks. So you've added recovery gear. You put as much in as practical, depending on the amount of people you've got and the amount of vehicles. So you can lessen your recovery gear for shorter trips and need more of it for longer trips. That's the way I see it there. So that doesn't change much. Now, food's a given. We all need to eat. So if you're doing a weekend trip, you get enough food so you can make all the meals that are required for your weekend trip. So you'd only need a little bit. Maybe I carry wolf pack boxes for food and stuff. I might only need one box if I'm doing an overnighter or a day trip. If I'm doing a longer trip, I might have a second, even a third box full of food and provisions, depending on where I'm going, because it's a long way, depending. So, and that, once again, is dependent on your setup. If you're going solo in the car, it's all got to fit in there, all of it. So you've got to think about how much gear you can actually need and how far you're going to go, where you can reprovision. If you're doing like a solo Simpson crossing or that kind of thing, or out in the middle of Australia, out somewhere traversing the desert one way or another, you could be away from provisions for a couple of weeks. So you need obviously more food, more water and drinks, and to keep yourself alive. You've still got your accommodation, which we haven't touched on yet, but we will. So that's going to come with you anyway. So it's literally just more of that. I mentioned accommodation, so we'll talk about accommodation. With the accommodation, it's however you camp is fine. Like we quite often in the Land Cruiser here, we camp with a double swag if it's me and Kaz, or a single swag if it's just me, on a stretcher. That's going to come anyway, unless you're only doing a day trip. But if you're not doing a day trip, that you're taking that anyway, so that doesn't make a lot of difference. So that's going to come a long trip, short trip, pretty well everything if it revolves overnight. As I said earlier, your cooking gear, work that out for the length of your trip. Spares. Spares are probably one of the biggest differences between a longer trip and a shorter trip, or a more remote trip as well. On a shorter trip, you're not going too far away, you're not too far from help. You probably don't need to take a lot of spares. If you're doing hardcore tracks, if you're a wheeler that does hardcore tracks and you're driving a truck with 35s or bigger, because these are the tracks you do, you're probably already aware that you may need CVs or need drive shafts or whatever, unis, hubs. You may need these, so carry those because you do that kind of track. If you're a tourer, a bit more like me, you're not likely to blow parts and break components anywhere near as much, so you don't need to take as many spares. But on a longer trip, you got to take the basics. You've got to take some basic fluid to top up power steering, oils, that kind of thing. You need to take some coolant in case you have a radiator issue. You need to take some radiator repair gear in case that does happen, like some Need It or putty of some description. You want some lubricants, WD-40 in case you've got to loosen some bolts off or replace some bolts. We'll get to the bolts and stuff in a minute. So you're going to need that kind of thing. So you're going to need some oils and some spares. And if I'm doing longer trips, I would tend to take a CV, particularly on a 200. I've broken CVs up in the high country. You've probably seen that before. But, you know, that kind of thing. But I've also crossed the Simpson Desert solo with just me, the wife, and the one car. And I had that kind of stuff with me, didn't need it, so that was cool. But you do definitely need your belts and your hoses to suit your car because they can go at any time. If you're doing a longer trip, people have said this before and it makes great sense. If you're doing a longer trip, maybe when you're getting your car serviced before you go on a trip, put all new belts and hoses on it. Keep your old ones that you took off, that you know fit, as spares. They will get you out of trouble. You don't need to have a brand new set of your spare parts if you just put a brand new set on. Just have your second hand ones you took off them, they'll be fine. And with that, on spare parts, on longer trips and shorter trips, like I said, you don't need all that stuff. Unless you've got a part in your car where you store that stuff and it just stays there, and a lot of us do, well, it's always there. So some of those parts, like you've always got belts and hoses. I've always got them in my car. I pull them out before a major trip, check them, make sure I've got them, put them back in. Bolts and spare parts like that, I'd always carry a little box of bolts or bag of bolts, just different size bolts that fit your different bits, your accessories, as well as your main parts for your car, the sizes that work for your car, because things vibrate out, things come loose. And on a longer trip again, maybe think about some of the bolts that you don't expect to lose, like trailing arm bolts if you've got coil suspension at the back, or even if you've got it at the front, just maybe a spare trailing arm bolt that fits all the trailing arms. You only might need the one. You'd be unlucky you need two. But something like that, any different bolts to hold your brackets in your engine bay for extra filters and stuff like you might have. So, yeah, just a bag of general bolts. It's not a real big bag. Even on a long trip, wouldn't be a big bag. It'd be, you know, a bit bigger than the size of your palm. Just with enough bolts and bits to get you out of the way. Some odd sort of bolts too. Maybe some bolts are smaller than some of the ones you need. In case your big bolt vibrates out or rips the thread apart, you maybe get a smaller bolt through and that'll do the job. You know, but things like that. You don't need a gazillion of those on a short trip local, but I would definitely have them on a long trip. What else do you need for a longer trip? Well, you've got to consider your water as well as your food, haven't you? You're going away for a day trip, a 10 litre, a 20 litre jerry, probably more than enough. Even for a week trip, that might be more than enough. If it's a month's trip, think about where you're getting your water from and how much you can carry. When I'm on a longer trip, I've got at least 40 litres. I've got a 40 litre tank behind the driver's and passenger seat of the Land Cruiser. I've also got jerry holders on the back, which I would, on a shorter trip, use for carrying me firewood. But a longer trip, I'll shake that out and I'll put water jerrys in. So I've got, in this case, 80 litres of water on the car. And then you've still got to know where you're going to get your water from. So usually you can get water in towns, near caravan parks, servos, that kind of thing, so it's not too bad. But know where you're getting your water from. Take enough water to do your party for a good percentage of the time you're out there for. Certainly you need something to cover you for every day you're out there. I'll use the desert as an example where it's hot. 5 litres of water per person per day is what's recommended for most people. You probably get away with less than that. But you know, that'd be what I would consider a minimum, just in case. And that includes your car. So you do hold a radiator. Your car's not going very far, but if you've got 40 litres of water on board, you can use a good chunk of it to fill up your radiator and maybe use a little bit less for yourself, but that'll get you out of trouble. Keep that in mind. So 5 litres per person per day is a good number. And like if you're on a couple of week trip, it's a lot of water, guys. So work out where you can get it, where you can carry it, and how much weight that adds to your gear. You're on a day trip, overnight trip, 1 jerry maybe even a 10 litre might be plenty. Less weight, less gear. So that covers that. What have I missed? We've covered accommodation. You're going to take your tent or your swag or whatever you're doing, whatever way. We've covered cooking equipment. You need some cooking equipment. You can add to that on a longer trip. Recovery gear. You need some recovery gear. You can add to that on a longer trip. Spare parts, maybe none or few, or quite a few on a longer trip, depending on your car. Some cars like these, cruisers, CVs, are sort of a popular breaking point. Military jets, guys. I actually quite like the sound of them. So I don't mind living not far from an Air Force base. But they do make it hard while you're filming. So if you've got a 40 series and is inclined to break axles or drive shafts, you know what you need. If you've got a Hilux and it breaks leaf springs at the back, you know what you need. You guys have got a rough idea what parts break on your car. So on a longer trip, just take some of those if you've got room for them. If you've got a group of people and you're driving along, you've got 5 people that have all got GQ patrols, I'll use that as an example. Well, you don't all need the same parts. You might have 2 CVs amongst you, or one for each side, because I think they're different on patrols. A short shaft, a long shaft, somebody carrying a spring, if you've all got similar setups. So you can share your spares around too. Once again, saves weight, saves space. If you're solo, well, I'm sorry, you better take all your stuff. Now, as soon as you start talking all your stuff, solo, long trips, your car probably has to be set up a bit differently. It's got to be able to handle the weight, and it's got to be able to have the space for those longer trips. And for some people, families, a longer trip is going to require a minimum of a trailer. Trailer changes a lot of stuff. It gives you all the gear for your kids, your wife, more cooking gear, more sleeping gear. So it's great, they're a benefit. A trailer or a camper trailer is going to help you. You could also help you carry more spares, take some of the weight out of your car. So that's fantastic. If you're like me and heading in the direction of a caravan, I don't have a caravan yet, guys, when you see this, but one is coming down the track for full-time travel. But if you get into a caravan, you may be able to carry some different spares. And don't forget, now you're towing, using more fuel. So you better think about what your fuel capacity is too. And I didn't touch on this before, but thinking about it now, I'm just doing this as we go along, guys. There's no script. I'm not looking at any paperwork. I'm just thinking this off the top of my head. If I miss anything today that you think is worth adding in, please put it in the comments. This is to help everybody. So while we've got the fuel, this car, I've got long range fuel tank. I can carry 270 litres of diesel in the Cruiser. So I can pretty well cope with any distance and still not have to carry extra fuel. But in the Ranger, like I did a trip last year to Fraser Island, well, I am short of fuel. So I've got a standard fuel tank in that. So I took 4 extra jerry cans full of diesel. That's an extra 80 litres. That's equivalent of another full tank full of fuel. That's not because you can't get fuel on Fraser Island, but as we know, once you get into islands or remote areas, fuel is quite expensive. And if you can carry it at a cheaper price, why not? But if you can't, know what your fuel capacity is and know where to get fuel. Allow for extra fuel usage if you're driving lots of beach, sand dunes, bush, low range. You certainly won't use what you use on the highway. That's not a difference between a short trip and a long trip, but it's something to consider anyway. And obviously on a short trip, if you start today on a full tank of fuel, you're going to have plenty. But if you're on a longer trip, a week or more, know your fuel range. You don't need to buy long range fuel tanks. If you're only using your car for a longer trip periodically, go in jerry cans or another fuel vessel of some description rather than spend a huge amount of money on a long range fuel tank. If you use it a lot, then go a long range fuel tank. It's really a better option. Yes, they're expensive. They are expensive. But your fuel's down low. It's a part of your car. You don't have to think about it anymore. And it saves you actual load space in your vehicle for carrying the fuel. Or worse, if you've got to put it in jerry cans on the roof rack because you run out of space anywhere else. On that, on a long trip, you might have stuff on your roof rack because you need the space inside for other things. If you are loading your roof rack, put light stuff on it. So swag, some chairs, that kind of thing. Only put fuel up there if you really have to. And if you do carry fuel up there, what I would do is once you've used, say, a quarter of a tank, half a tank, and you know you can put a 20 litre jerry of fuel into your car, put it in. Fill that tank in the car back up. You can look at your fuel gauge, you feel better, and you've got 20 litres, about 19 to 20 kilos of roof load gone, or anywhere else. So now it's in your fuel tank, so it's down low, lower centre of gravity. It's just way better, guys. So think about that. What else do we need for a longer trip over a shorter trip? Just the room for your supplies. If you're drinking a lot more stuff, like your beers, your wines, your spirits, you need to take those with you because you're at the bush. So you can't buy them. So you need room for those. So think about all of that stuff. How much extra food and drink you need and water. That's the major difference. You obviously need less if you're going for a day trip or an overnighter. I have two separate fridges I take depending on the trip. One's a 15 litre fridge. That'll do me for a day trip, even an overnighter. The other one I've got is a 50 litre fridge. That's better for weekends with the wife and week trips, it's just better. It's got more capacity. It's that simple. The longer of a trip, a bigger fridge would help. On fridges, if you're new, you're just getting into four-wheel drive, you haven't got a fridge, your trips may be a little bit shorter. You don't think you've got to rush out and buy a fridge. These days, fridges are pretty cheap, so it's not a bad way to do it. But fridges impose other loads on your electrical system that you've got to think about as well. If you've only just got into four-wheel drive, and get a decent esky, fill it with ice, you got a couple of good days out of that. But just know that you're going to be doing that a lot on a longer trip. So there's that. And if you're doing longer trips, you probably would look at a fridge and how to power that fridge. There's all sorts of ways of powering it. There's dual battery systems is common. But these days, there's also a lot of good battery packs that just plug in. One that comes to mind right off the top of my head, not sponsored in any way, is the RedArc Go Block. You just buy that, it plugs into a Anderson plug or something that runs from your start battery. So it can be charging up while you're driving. You can unplug it off your battery, use it to run your fridge, take it out, put it in your tent, take your fridge out if you want. But RedArc's just the one I thought of. There's others, iTech World have got them, super cheap to do battery boxes. There's lots of ways of doing that. It doesn't have to be a big sophisticated system in your car unless you're using it more often. That brings us to car builds, but I honestly think we should talk about building four-wheel drives in stages on another video. So I'm literally running out of things to say, guys. I've been filming this for, 20 odd minutes. So hopefully this has been of use to you. So recap, in a lot of ways, without going back into nitty gritty, longer trip just needs more stuff, but not a lot more. I didn't even touch on tools, but you don't need a lot of tools for anything. But if you are doing a longer trip, you may want to take a few more specialist tools, particularly if you're taking some specialist spare parts. Get the tools that you need for those. Example, Land Cruiser's got a castle nut in there on the CV. I think it's a 24-point nut or something. It's rather strange. So you need the right tool for that. But other vehicles don't. GQs just need a big hub nut, like a 53, 56 mil. I don't know the measurements exactly. Nissan owners, don't hate me. But you guys know what I'm talking about. So that kind of thing. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up, guys. It's enough of your day wasted. If you're in Australia and you're watching this today, happy Bathurst Day. If you're into car racing and stuff, like half Australia is on Bathurst weekend. If you're overseas and you've heard of the Bathurst Day in Australia, it's the biggest car race of the year for V8 supercars in Australia. You should be able to get a telecast of it in your country somewhere. Anyway, thanks again for watching, guys. I hope I haven't rabbited on too long, and I hope you got something out of this. If you did, throw a like on it. If you'd like more of this kind of content, where I'm just going to explain to you things, in my opinion, of how to build up a car one way or another, let me know in the comments. I'll try to remember to do those for you. If you're new here, thanks for joining me. And if you're still here at this part of the video, thanks for sticking around. Maybe consider subscribing. Helps the channel a lot. Just by clicking the subscribe, that helps me a bit. If you click the notification bell, you'll know when a new video comes out. And I've got a dedicated group of followers, the old hands as I call them. Thanks, guys, for watching my clips week in and week out and taking the time out of your day to sit back and watch my stuff. I really do appreciate it. I've started to get a little bit of merch on the website, not a lot, but a little bit. So check the website periodically to see what I've got. At the time of this release, I only have stickers, but more coming as we go. Keep up with us, say g'day on our social media. I'm a little bit quiet on Instagram at the moment and Facebook, but if you want to ask me questions or talk to me, get on the socials. They're down below, and you know, you can have a chat there. It's all good. So it's socials, website. You're obviously watching me on YouTube. Thanks again, guys. Just get out there, enjoy the bush, just enjoy everywhere that you go. Enjoy camping. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't take too much stuff. Just take what you need. Just have a good time. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers from Steve, and Kaz is in the background hiding, producing as always. From Mud Ducks Touring Australia. We'll see you on the next one, guys. And if you do take some of my advice, let me know what you needed. And if I've forgotten anything, as I said before, put it down below in the comments so that everyone else can learn. Because I'm only a guy who's been doing it for a while, and I don't script anything and I could forget. So anything I've missed or you want more clarification on, comments, guys. Cheers, we'll see you next week. All the best. From myself and Kaz again at Mud Ducks Touring Australia. Take care, guys.